First, how do the comparative study of languages, archaeological sources, and the vast corpus of Vedic literature help to determine the Aryan problem in Indian history? So, first of all, tell me what do you mean by the Aryan problem in Indian history? क्या है ये? Origin of Aryans. It is the uncertainty with regards to the origin of Aryans. On the basis of linguistic studies, scholars such as Max Muller, etc., what was the traditional position that they took? Were they indigenous or were they outsiders? आउटसाइडर्स थे, तो दे सेड कि यूरेशिया सेंट्रल एशिया के स्टेप ग्रासलैंड वाले रीजन से आए थे. डिबेट कब इमर्ज होता है? And certain scholars, led by Professor B.B. Lal, suggested that India was the original homeland of the Aryans. ऋग्वेद में जो सप्त सिंधव वाला region mentioned है, that was their original homeland, and for this he has relied upon some linguistic and literary references. ठीक है? तो knowing this, what would be a good note to begin the answer? कि डिबेट कब इमर्ज हुआ? When Professor B.B. Lal challenged the traditional position. ठीक है, तो ये यहाँ पे हम मेंशन कर सकते हैं that it is a matter of debate. That uncertainty with regards to origin of Aryans emerged when Professor B.B. Lal challenged the traditional position with regards to this question and suggested that India was the original homeland of the Aryans. ठीक है? Following this, किस पोजीशन को हमें पहले एक्सपैंड करना चाहिए? थ्योरी ऑफ इंडिजिनस ओरिजिन और थ्योरी ऑफ फॉरेन ओरिजिन? अगर 3 पार्ट में नहीं, तुम ये सोचो कि कंक्लूजन किस नोट पे करना है हमें. कंसेंसस क्या बोलता है? फॉरेनर्स थे, राइट? तो सिंस दैट इज द कंक्लूजन, तो किस नोट पे हमें एंड करना चाहिए? कि फॉरेनर्स ही हैं, राइट? तो अगर हमको कंक्लूजन में ये करना है, तो सेकंड वाले पोर्शन में क्या आना चाहिए? दैट दे वर फॉरेनर्स, राइट? पहले किसको बताना चाहिए? इंडिजिनस ओरिजिन, राइट? दैट इज वाई हमने शुरुआत भी यहीं से करी हुई है. थ्योरी ऑफ इंडिजिनस ओरिजिन किसने दिया? प्रोफेसर बीबी लाल. किस बेसिस पे दिया? On the basis of linguistic and literary references along with some cultural studies, cultural comparisons, right? So, for example, out of all the Indo-European languages, सबसे पुराना वाला कौन सा है? संस्कृत, right? So, Sanskrit is the oldest of the Indo-European languages. This suggests that the Aryans had developed this language over here, following which they moved in different directions out of India towards the west and north. ठीक है? Secondly, which is the oldest work in any of the Indo-European languages? Vedas. ठीक है? तो ऋग्वेद. Following this, they took some of these ideas and moved them abroad. That is why you find mentions of deities such as Ahura Mazda in Persia or Indra, Agni, Varun in the region of Anatolia, Turkey वाला जो ईस्टर्न टर्की वाला रीजन है वहां पर. Further, which of the Indo-European languages contains the most words with Vedic roots? It is Sanskrit only. ठीक है, तो उन्होंने क्या बोला? As the early Aryans migrated outwards outside India, they the language experienced something known as linguistic dilution, right? So they came into contact with native communities living in these areas. They adopted some of their words and lost some of their own words. तो इसीलिए ये लिंग्विस्टिक डाइल्यूशन की वजह से वहां के जो लैंग्वेजेस हैं उनके उनमें संस्कृत या फिर वैदिक रूट्स वाले वर्ड्स कम होते जाते हैं एज यू मूव कीप मूविंग अवे फ्रॉम इंडिया, राइट? तो linguistic dilution as a function of outward migration. Fourthly, in all the regions where Indo-European languages are spoken, which of them has the most developed philosophy? India. So chances क्या है that this was the oldest and most sophisticated. As they moved away from India, जब नए जगहों पे जाकर के सेटल हुए, they had to start anew. ठीक है, तो that resulted in lesser sophistication in philosophical development. तो इंडिया और India's philosophical culture is the most developed among all the places where Indo-European languages are spoken. हाँ, this is the only one written now. ठीक है, अच्छा, और क्या सजेस्ट किया इन्होंने? Any other evidence that he gave? देखो, he also suggested that in the entirety of the Rig Veda, the early Aryans have not mentioned any other region as their homeland apart from the region of Sapt Sindhav, right? So it is highly unlikely कि migratory people अपना original homeland इतनी आसानी से भूल जाएं. They feel very emotional towards it. The original homeland evokes a lot of memory, a lot of love. It is the sort of promised land कि वहां से निकले हैं एक दिन वहां पे वापस भी जाना है. You see this among the Turks also, you saw this among the Mongols also, you saw this among the Scythians also, Kushans also, सब में ये characteristic दिखता है. So अगर Aryans में ऐसा नहीं है, that means that they were not migrants who arrived in India. They were in fact migrating out of India. ठीक है, तो Rigved mentions Sapt Sindhav as the original homeland of Aryans. ठीक है, is this much clear? Now we come to the next theory. क्या? Theory of foreign origin. चले, ये मैं अपलोड करवा दूंगा, डोंट वरी. वंस अगेन यहाँ पर स्कॉलर्स ने फोनेटिक्स archaeology, and genetic studies. को यूज करके सजेस्ट किया है that India was not the original homeland of the Aryans. Aryans were a group of migratory people who began arriving in the subcontinent, in the northwestern portion of the subcontinent, sometime during the middle of the second millennium BC. And they did not arrive all at once. They trickled in small groups over hundreds of years. This process continued for hundreds of years. ठीक है? Max Muller and Michael Witzel. ये फोनेटिक्स के किस पॉइंट को उजागर करते हैं? What do they emphasize upon? That among all the Indo-European languages, Sanskrit is definitely unique. It is made unique phonetically because of the profusion of retroflex sounds. Right? Retroflex sounds कौन से होते हैं? Sounds which are made with the tip of the tongue striking the top palate, the upper palate. Sounds such as t, th, d, ढ, etc. बाकी सारी इंडो यूरोपियन लैंग्वेजेस में ये वाले वर्ड्स इतने ज्यादा नहीं मिलते हैं, लेकिन वैदिक संस्कृत और क्लासिकल संस्कृत में ये वाले वर्ड्स मोर देन 300 मिलते हैं जिनमें ऐसे वर्ड्स हों, राइट? सो दैट मीन्स दिस वाज अ यूनिक फीचर ऑफ एन इंडो यूरोपियन लैंग्वेज बीइंग स्पोकन इन इंडिया. एंड ऐसा क्या एक्सप्लेनेशन होगा इसका? That Aryans, after arriving in India, had mingled with the local communities from whom they had adopted these sounds in their folio of phonetics, right? And that is why there is such profusion. ये साइड करते हैं किसको? रेट्रोफ्लेक्स साउंड्स को. ठीक है? Secondly, do we have any archaeological evidence of the existence of Aryans in India before the mid second millennium BC? कोई इंस्क्रिप्शन, कोई आर्कियोलॉजिकल रिमेन्स, कोई सेटलमेंट रिमेन्स, कोई माउंट्स एटसेट्रा कुछ मिलता है उनका? नहीं मिलता है. बट वी डेफिनेटली हैव एविडेंस ऑफ आर्यंस इन सेंट्रल एशिया एंड एशिया माइनर फ्रॉम एज अर्ली एज द लेट थर्ड मिलेनियम बीसी ऑनवर्ड्स. यानी कि 2200 बीसी के ऑनवर्ड्स से कई सारे इंस्क्रिप्शंस हमको मिलने लग जाते हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल द हितानी इंस्क्रिप्शंस, the Mitanni inscriptions, Kassite inscriptions, indicating they are spread over a large portion of Central Asia and Western Asia. ठीक है? तो inscriptions in Central Asia and Western Asia as early as the late third millennium BCE suggests that Aryans resided in these regions, occupied these regions, at least since this period. In contrast, there is no such evidence for India. And on the basis of ancient genetic studies, we get a quite reliable pattern of ancient migration. And वहां से क्या पता लगता है? That around the mid second millennium BC, a group of nomads began arriving and settling in the region of modern day Punjab and northwest frontier province in small streams over thousands of years. So it also confirms the Aryan migration theory. ठीक है? However, यहाँ पर भी एक nuance exist करता है, right? That has been expressed in the form of the cultural diffusion theory by scholars such as Colin Renfrew and रोमिला थापर। ये लोग क्या बोलते हैं? That the emergence of the Aryan culture in India was not the result only of Aryan migration and settlement in India. Rather, the Aryan culture that crystallized in India in the end was the result of a synthesis between the early Aryan culture from outside India and the native culture of India. तो ये कल्चरल डिफ्यूजन, कल्चरल एक्सचेंज की बात कर रहे हैं, ठीक है? So it is not only a question of migration of people, it is also a question of intermingling of ideas, customs, culture, etc. ठीक है? This is what they suggest. On this basis, conclusion, question क्या था? How do the comparative study of languages, archaeological sources, and vast corpus of Vedic literature help to determine the Aryan problem in Indian history? Discuss. बताओ, conclude कैसे करेंगे? While it is unlikely that India was the original homeland of the Aryans, it is highly likely that India was the original homeland of the Aryan culture. ठीक है? तो आर्यन पीपल का नहीं, बट आर्यन कल्चर का ओरिजिनल होमलैंड डेफिनेटली इंडिया ही था. इज दिस क्लियर? India may not have been the original homeland of the Aryan people, but was definitely the original homeland of the Aryan culture. क्लियर है? पक्का? चलिए.